In 1956, The Ten Commandments wasn't just a film, it was a story of faith, power, and destiny. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling is even more shocking. Some lives took dramatic turns, others disappeared without a trace. Keep watching. You might not recognize who they became. Yul Brynner as Ramesses II. Now we come to Yul Brynner, born July 11, 1920. The man who played Ramesses II, the proud and powerful Egyptian king determined to crush Moses and maintain absolute control in the Ten Commandments. In 1956, at 36 years old, he transformed a rival into a commanding force, radiating authority, pride, and inner conflict. And with his iconic shaved head and piercing gaze, Brynner didn't just play a king, he became one. Yul Brynner died at the age of 65 on October 10, 1985, after a long and painful battle with inoperable lung cancer caused by years of heavy smoking. His ashes were laid to rest in a monastery in France, far from the fame that once surrounded him. He had already secured his place in Hollywood history with an Oscar-winning role in The King and I and standout performances in The Magnificent Seven, building a career that made him one of the most recognizable stars of his time, with an estimated net worth of $10 million. But behind that powerful image was a life filled with chaos and consequences. As a teenager, Brynner fell into drug addiction, battling opium dependency before ever becoming famous. Even at the height of his success, his personal life remained unstable, marked by 4 marriages and restless relationships. And then came the most shocking twist. The man who smoked up to 5 packs a day would ultimately face a slow, painful death from lung cancer. In his final days, he recorded a warning against smoking, a message that only aired after he was gone. And in that moment, the king who once ruled the screen left behind something far more powerful than any performance. Charlton Heston as Moses. We begin with Charlton Heston, born October 4, 1923. The man who played Moses, the fearless prophet chosen to lead his people out of slavery in the Ten Commandments, 1956. At just 33 years old, he took on the role of a lifetime, carrying the emotional and spiritual weight of an entire nation. And from that moment on, Heston didn't just portray Moses. He became the ultimate symbol of strength, faith, and authority on screen. Charlton Heston passed away at the age of 84 on April 5, 2008, in Beverly Hills, after battling pneumonia complicated by Alzheimer's disease. Across more than 100 films and 6 decades, he became the king of Hollywood epics, winning an Academy Award for Ben-Hur and leaving an unforgettable mark with Planet of the Apes. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $40 million, and his legacy remained larger than life. But the most devastating part of his story came at the end. The man who once delivered powerful speeches as Moses slowly lost his memory to Alzheimer's, fading away in a cruel and silent decline. At the same time, his role as president of the NRA turned him into one of the most controversial figures in Hollywood, dividing public opinion like never before. Yet through all the noise and conflict, one thing never broke: his 64-year marriage to Lydia Clark. And in the end, while the world argued over his legacy, Charlton Heston faced something far more tragic: losing the very mind that made him legendary. Edward G. Robinson as Dathan. We begin with Edward G. Robinson, born December 12, 1893. The actor who portrayed Dathan, the defiant Hebrew who challenged Moses in the Ten Commandments, 1956. When he was 63 years old, he stepped into a role built on tension, disbelief, and quiet rebellion. His presence carried weight, not loud, not exaggerated, just controlled, steady opposition that made every scene feel uneasy. Edward G. Robinson died on January 26, 1973, at the age of 79 from bladder cancer. He had just completed Soylent Green, knowing his health was failing throughout the production. His body was cremated, and later that same year, he received an honorary Academy Award. There was a period in his life when everything stopped without warning. He had already built a reputation through films like Little Caesar, becoming one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Then the accusations came during the blacklist era. Work slowed down, then disappeared. Years passed with fewer opportunities, smaller roles, and a growing distance between who he had been and what was left of his career. When he appeared again in The Ten Commandments, it didn't feel like a comeback in the usual sense. It felt like someone returning after being pushed out for too long, still capable, still present, just no longer at the center. And by the time recognition finally came, he was already gone. Anne Baxter as Princess Nefertiti. We begin with Anne Baxter, born May 7, 1923, the actress who portrayed Princess Nefertiti, a royal figure driven by love, jealousy, and ambition in The Ten Commandments, 1956. In 1956, at 33 years old, she delivered a performance full of emotional pressure, constantly shifting between vulnerability and control. Her character wasn't just part of the story. She carried the tension that made the drama feel personal. Anne Baxter died on December 12, 1985, at the age of 62 after suffering a stroke on Madison Avenue in New York while trying to hail a taxi. The moment was sudden, with no warning, in the middle of an ordinary day. She was later laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, a place where many of Hollywood's biggest names ended up, though by then, she had already been away from that world for years. Her life didn't collapse all at once. It thinned out over time. 3 marriages ended, and after the death of her second husband, she made a decision that changed everything. She left the industry behind and moved to a remote farm in Australia. That distance solved one problem, but created another. The longer she stayed away, the harder it became to return, and the industry moved on without waiting. Even with an Oscar for The Razor's Edge and recognition from All About Eve, her presence in Hollywood grew smaller year by year. By the time she died, her name still carried weight, but her place in the industry had already faded long before that final moment. Yvonne De Carlo, as Sephora. We begin with Yvonne De Carlo, born September 1, 1922, the woman who played Sephora, the devoted and gentle wife of Moses in The Ten Commandments, 1956. At 34 years old, she brought warmth and emotional balance to one of the most epic stories ever told. And in a film filled with power and miracles, her quiet strength became the human heart of the story. But her real life unfolded far from that calm image. Years after the film, De Carlo suffered a stroke in 1998, a turning point that led her into a quiet and isolated final chapter. She spent her last years in the motion picture and television country house and hospital in Woodland Hills, away from the spotlight she once dominated. On January 8, 2007, she passed away at the age of 84 due to heart failure, her body later cremated. Yet the most painful part of her story came long before that. At the height of her career, she married stuntman Robert Morgan, whose life changed forever after losing a leg in a horrific on-set accident. From that moment, De Carlo's life shifted from rising star to sole provider, carrying financial burdens as debts piled up behind the scenes. While audiences later adored her again in The Munsters, few knew she had sacrificed major career opportunities just to hold her family together. Behind the fame was a woman slowly worn down by responsibility, proving that sometimes the strongest characters on screen are hiding the heaviest struggles off it. John Derek as Joshua. We begin with John Derek, born August 12, 1926. The actor who portrayed Joshua, the loyal warrior and devoted follower of Moses in The Ten Commandments, 1956. When he was 30 years old, he embodied strength, discipline, and unwavering faith beside one of cinema's greatest figures, And in that moment, he seemed destined for a legacy defined by honor and heroism. But the story that followed would take a far more controversial turn. John Derek died on May 22, 1998, at the age of 71 from cardiovascular disease, leaving behind a legacy that remains deeply debated. By the end of his life, he had stepped away from acting, reinventing himself as a director and photographer, yet his name was no longer tied only to his work, but to the headlines that followed him. Because behind the camera, Derek became known for something far more unsettling. His relationships with significantly younger women sparked outrage, especially his involvement with Bo Derek when she was just 16 and he was nearly 50. Critics accused him of controlling not just their image, but their entire careers, blurring the line between mentorship and manipulation. While he once played a man defined by loyalty and purpose, his real-life choices told a completely different story, one that continues to divide public opinion long after his death. John Carradine as Aaron. We begin with John Carradine, born February 5, 1906. The actor who portrayed Aaron, the older brother of Moses and a guiding religious figure in the Ten Commandments, 1956. At 50, he delivered a restrained and steady performance, shaping Aaron as a voice of faith and continuity among the Israelites. He stood at the center of key moments in the movie. John Carradine died on November 27, 1988, at the age of 82 from heart failure and kidney failure. He passed away in Milan, Italy, while traveling, and after memorial services, his body was buried at sea between the California coast and Catalina Island. His health had been severely affected by long-term rheumatoid arthritis, which progressively damaged his joints and mobility. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was approximately $1 million. By the 1970s and 1980s, Carradine's rheumatoid arthritis had visibly deformed his hands and posture, something that can be clearly observed in his later film appearances. Despite this, his filmography continued to grow, eventually exceeding 350 credits, making him one of the most prolific actors in Hollywood history. Records show he continued accepting roles at a high rate during this period, largely because acting remained his primary source of income while supporting a large family, including future actors David, Keith, and Robert Carradine. The pattern is consistent and documented. Chronic illness reduced his physical capability, but financial responsibility and workload kept him active in the industry until the end of his life. Vincent Price as Baca. We start with Vincent Price, born May 27, 1911. The actor who took on the role of Baca, the harsh Egyptian overseer in the Ten Commandments, 1956. At 45 years old, he brought a controlled cruelty to the character, turning Baca into a direct symbol of oppression against the Hebrew slaves. His scenes placed him face to face with Moses, making him one of the few figures who directly embodied resistance to the story's central turning point. Vincent Price died on October 25, 1993, at the age of 82 from lung cancer after decades of heavy smoking. In his final years, he was also diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which affected his movement and speech. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered off Point Dume in Malibu, California. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $5 million. In the late 1980s, Price's public appearances became noticeably limited. Interviews from that period confirm he had already reduced his workload due to declining health, particularly after the Parkinson's diagnosis began affecting his motor control. Medical reports link his lung cancer directly to long-term tobacco use, a habit he maintained for most of his adult life before quitting late. This sequence, prolonged smoking, cancer diagnosis, followed by neurological decline, provides a clear, documented progression that explains why his career slowed significantly in his final years. Cedric Hardwicke as Sethi. Then, there is Cedric Hardwicke, born February 19, 1893, the actor who portrayed Pharaoh Sethi, the aging ruler of Egypt in the Ten Commandments, 1956. At 63, he delivered a composed and authoritative performance, presenting Sethi as a king, balancing power, tradition, and the rising conflict surrounding Moses. His role established the political and familial tension that shaped the film's early narrative. Cedric Hardwicke died on August 6, 1964, at the age of 71 from emphysema, a chronic lung disease strongly associated with long-term smoking. He passed away in New York, and after a memorial service, his body was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium in London, where his ashes were scattered. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $500,000, reflecting the value of his career during that era. What made his final chapter more striking was how sharply it contrasted with the scale of his earlier career. By the 1930s and 1940s, Hardwicke had already established himself as one of the most respected British actors of his generation, earning a knighthood in 1934 and building a reputation on both sides of the Atlantic. He appeared in major productions like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1939, and Rope, 1948, under Alfred Hitchcock, and later took on commanding roles in epics such as The Ten Commandments, 1956. Yet behind that legacy, his later years marked a slow career. Martha Scott as Jochebed. We turn to Martha Scott, born September 22, 1912, who took on the role of Jochebed, the mother of Moses in The Ten Commandments, 1956. When she was 44 years old, she delivered a deeply emotional performance, portraying a mother forced to give up her child to save his life. Her role became one of the most human and tragic elements in the film's early storyline. Martha Scott died on May 28, 2003, at the age of 90 from natural causes in Van Nuys, Los Angeles. She was buried at the Masonic Cemetery in Jamesport, Missouri, alongside her husband Mel Powell. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was around $1.5 million. Notably, she played Charlton Heston's mother twice in The Ten Commandments, 1956, and again in Ben-Hur, 1959. A rare casting repetition that stood out even in an era of frequent typecasting. That unusual casting choice reflected something deeper about her screen identity. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Scott became one of Hollywood's most reliable maternal figures, not because of repetition alone, but because of the emotional control she brought to each role. Directors consistently leaned on her ability to convey strength without exaggeration, often placing her at the emotional center of large-scale productions. From early critical success on stage to prominent supporting roles in major epics, her career gradually settled into clear pattern. Judith Anderson as Memnet Next is Judith Anderson, born February 10, 1897, who portrayed Memnet, the loyal servant who uncovers Moses' true identity in The Ten Commandments, 1956. At 59, she delivered a sharp and controlled performance, shaping Memnet as a key figure in revealing one of the film's most critical secrets. Her presence added tension to a turning point that directly affected Moses' fate. Judith Anderson died on January 3, 1992, at the age of 94 from pneumonia in Santa Barbara, California. She spent her final years living there after a long international career across stage and film. She was honored with the title of Dame by the British Crown, recognizing her contributions to the performing arts. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was not widely publicized, but reflected a long and sustained career. Her transition from stage to screen revealed a style that few actors could replicate. Years of theatrical training gave her a level of vocal control and presence that translated powerfully into film, most notably in Rebecca, 1940, where her portrayal of Mrs. Danvers earned an Academy Award nomination. From that point on, she became closely associated with roles that required authority, restraint, and psychological tension. Whether on stage or in supporting film roles like Memnet, her impact came from precision, timing, and the quiet intensity she brought into every scene. Nina Foch as Bethia. We begin with Nina Foch, Born April 20th, 1924. The actress who portrayed Bethia, the Egyptian princess who rescues and adopts the infant Moses in the Ten Commandments, 1956. At 32 years old, she brought intelligence and emotional restraint to the role, shaping Bethia as a figure caught between royal duty and personal conviction. Her performance added a crucial human dimension to the origin of Moses' story. Nina Foch died on December 5, 2008, at the age of 84 due to complications from myelodysplasia, a serious blood disorder. She passed away at the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center in California. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were entrusted to her family. Beyond acting, she spent over 40 years teaching at the University of Southern California, USC, where she trained generations of filmmakers. Even as her on-screen presence became less frequent, her influence inside the industry never slowed down. At USC, she built a reputation for her disciplined approach to directing and performance analysis, often breaking scenes down with a precision that mirrored real film production. Her impact can be traced through students like Edward Zwick, who went on to direct major films and openly acknowledged her guidance. Remarkably, she remained fully committed to teaching into her 80s, with reports noting she was still leading a class just one day before her condition suddenly worsened, marking a career that stayed active, structured, and deeply connected to the craft until the very end. Olive Dearing as Miriam. Then we move to Olive Dearing, born October 11, 1918, who portrayed Miriam in The Ten Commandments, 1956. When she was 38 years old, she brought quiet strength to the role of Moses' sister, a character who stood at the crossroads of faith, loyalty, and survival. Though not the most dominant presence on screen, her performance carried emotional weight in the unfolding biblical narrative. Olive Dearing passed away on March 22, 1986, at the age of 67 after battling cancer. She was laid to rest at Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla, New York. Despite working across film, television, radio, and stage for nearly 2 decades, her estimated net worth remained modest, reflecting a career built on craft rather than commercial fame. Unlike many of her co-stars, she never became a household name, even after appearing in one of the most iconic epics of all time. Her career, however, was far more extensive than many realized. A lifetime member of the Actors Studio, Dearing developed her foundation in theater, performing in productions like Richard II, Counselor at Law, and Tennessee Williams' Suddenly Last Summer, where her work received critical praise. She had already collaborated with director Cecil B. DeMille before The Ten Commandments, having appeared in Samson and Delilah, 1949, which led to her being cast again years later. Behind the scenes, her life was marked by quiet struggles rather than public scandal. She married director Leo Penn in 1947, but the marriage ended in divorce. Her second husband, Alan James, died in 1969, leaving her widowed. She had no children, and as the years passed, her presence in Hollywood gradually faded. By the time of her death, her story had become one of those familiar in the industry, an actress of real talent, respected by peers, but largely overlooked by history. Frank DeKova as Abiram shifting to Frank DeKova, born March 17, 1910, who portrayed Abiram in The Ten Commandments, 1956. At 46, he brought a cold, intimidating presence to the role, fitting perfectly into the film's darker power dynamics. His sharp features and controlled intensity made him a natural choice for characters driven by authority and menace. Frank DeKova died on October 15, 1981, at the age of 71 after suffering heart failure in his sleep at his home in California. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. His career, though rarely leading, spanned decades across film and television, with a steady income built on consistent supporting roles rather than major stardom. What makes DeKova's journey stand out is how unlikely it began. Before acting, he was a school teacher in New York, far removed from the ruthless characters he would later portray. After transitioning to Shakespearean theater, he caught the attention of director Elia Kazan, which led to his move to Hollywood. From there, he built a reputation playing gangsters, military officers, and Native American chiefs, appearing in films like Viva Zapata, 1952, and The Big Sky, 1952. Yet his most memorable role came from an unexpected direction. In the television series F Troop, 1965 to 1967, he played Chief Wild Eagle, a comedic role that revealed a completely different side of his talent. It was a sharp contrast to the villains he was known for, proving that behind the stern exterior was an actor capable of surprising range. Still, like many character actors of his era, his legacy became one of recognition without true fame. H.B. Warner as Aminadab. H.B. Warner appeared as Aminadab, the wise and spiritual elder who guided others with quiet authority. He was 80 years old when he carried this role as one of the oldest and most dignified presences in the film. Even at that age, his performance still held a powerful emotional weight. Sadly, he passed away at 82 on December 21st, 1958, after suffering heart-related complications following a serious fall. His final years were marked by physical weakness, a stark contrast to the strength he once portrayed on screen. Before that, his journey had been long and demanding. From silent film stardom to supporting roles, he slowly faded as Hollywood changed, forced to step away from leading roles due to age. Even so, he remained respected, especially for iconic performances that defined an earlier era. And in his personal life, stability never truly lasted. 2 marriages ended in loss and separation, leaving him increasingly isolated in his later years. His life behind the camera was far quieter and lonelier than many imagined. H.B. Warner left behind a legacy tied to classic cinema, with an estimated net worth of around $2 million, a reminder of a career that once stood at the very top. Debra Paget as Debra Paget appeared as Lilia, the innocent water girl and the sole survivor whose presence carried both vulnerability and hope. She was just 23 years old when she became one of the film's most memorable and emotional figures. Her beauty and charm quickly made her stand out to audiences. As of 2026, she is 92 years old and has long stepped away from Hollywood, choosing a quiet life centered around faith and privacy. She left the spotlight at the height of her career, a decision that still surprises many. Before that, her career was filled with both admiration and pressure. She became a symbol of beauty in Hollywood, even receiving a marriage proposal from Elvis Presley, yet struggled to maintain long-term success as roles began to fade. And her personal life was far from stable. 3 marriages ended in heartbreak, including a brief union with a wealthy oil heir that lasted only months, but changed her life financially. These emotional upheavals pushed her further away from the industry. In the end, Debra Paget chose peace over fame, living a private life with an estimated net worth of around $10 million, a quiet ending to a once dazzling career. From legendary performances to lives shaped by time, the cast of The 10 Commandments, 1956, left behind stories far beyond the screen, some triumphant, others quietly fading, but all unforgettable. Decades later, their journeys reveal how fame evolves and how legacy truly lasts. So looking at them in 2026, which transformation surprised you the most? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more then and now stories.